could have products sold to you as a farmer, and the first question I always ask is, where is the independent research work to support your claim? And usually when you don't find independent work, there's usually a reason for it. There's a strong possibility the product doesn't actually do what it's meant to do. And at the same time, if you actually complete a trial on farm to analyse, see, does the product make a difference? And if it doesn't on farm, that shouldn't be a surprise to a farmer, because ultimately, sometimes there isn't independent research work to support the product in the background for a given reason.
Every time we apply an input to crops, we expect a return on our investment. Usually the confidence comes from trial data, whether it's a new variety, fertiliser or plant protection product, demonstrating its benefits when used correctly. However, not every farmer has the luxury of farming in conditions identical to those of a research centre where the trials are meticulously controlled to showcase the product's effectiveness. This doesn't mean farmers can't experiment and validate these results on their own farms. You are listening to the latest episode of the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. We would really appreciate it if you could listen, follow, and give us a review on Apple or Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast from. On-farm trials and the validation of existing research plays a crucial role in ensuring that the new practices or products deliver real value for you as a farmer. We're going to have a look at on-farm trials and how they might be utilised on your farm. I'm delighted today to be joined by Jack Jameson, a Teagasc researcher from Oak Park, and John Pettit, a tillage advisor in the Southeast. Jack, you might explain a little bit about replicated trials and how they're different to on-farm trials.
The best way to explain this is to first cover what's involved in a typical replicated control trial. As you said, the likes of what we do here in Oak Park. So a good trial always starts with good planning and good design. So a trial that's poorly planned and designed is not going to be able to answer the question you're asking it. So if you think about a small plot trial that most growers would have seen in the likes of Oak Park, there are a few components that are part of the design of all of our trials. So they're replication. So that means for whatever treatment or control or normal practice treatment we have, that is replicated or repeated several times throughout our experiment. Then we've blocks or blocking as well. So the experiment is literally just split into blocks, and then those treatments are each placed once within each block, and then we've randomization, so the treatments are randomized in different locations in each block. So we use these components as part of our trial designs to ensure that any difference we see between what we are testing and normal practice is not just down to chance or other variables such as soil variability in the field. Now, that all might sound very complicated, but in practice it is actually quite simple and intuitive. So that's what's involved in typical replicated trials. So how do farm trials vary from that? So in reality, there's a lot of growers carrying out lots of different types of trials for lots of different types of reasons. So there's a few different variations. So one is that growers might try a new practice or treatment on an entire field. Secondly, there's growers splitting fields and having normal practice in one half and new practice or treatment in the other half. And then of course there's the next step on from that, which is tramline trials. And look, these three examples of on-farm trials incorporate the components we use in replicated trials to differing degrees, which means there's differences in what we can learn from each type of trial, which we might chat through a little later if you want.
The thing about replicated trials as they're carried out is that there's only one component change. So pretty much everything else is the same, bar, I know it's a lower rate of the fungicide or less fertilizer or more fertilizer, whatever it happens to be. But it's only the fertilizer in question, if you like, is different. Whereas on a farm, there might just be other things in there that people are trying. It's a systems kind of thing rather than an actual one component type change.
Yeah, you're dead right, Michael. So in Oak Park, when we're carrying out a trial, we try to control everything as much as possible apart from that one little thing we're looking at or one treatment that we're changing. So that sort of gives us confidence, along with good design, that the treatment differences that we're actually seeing are actually down to the treatment themselves and not just down to chance or soil variability or other management practices or history and some of the other things that you mentioned there. So yeah, you're dead right. That definitely needs to be considered.
Okay. And then in terms of, yield, I suppose, is where a lot of the trials end up, and you're looking at the differences in yield for the most part. So in the replicated trials, what would give confidence or what gives us confidence, I suppose, when we can complete these trials, that they can be repeatable when that's brought out to farms?
Yeah, okay. So, as you say, replicated trials uh, from what we do in Oak Park, they're generally more accurate and repeatable and give us a higher confidence level in our results. Now, this is because we ensure the experiments, as I mentioned, are well designed, and as well as that, we analyze them statistically. So, good design and analyzing our results statistically ensures that we are confident that the significant results that we see are actually down to the treatment alone and not just down to chance or the other influencing factors. So this basically gives us a high level of confidence that when we are recommending practices or treatments to growers, that when they bring them out on their farms, that they should see a significant benefit, and it's not other things causing noise or variation in the results we're seeing.
And in what circumstances would that not be the case in terms of it's, mightn't be as repeatable as we would like when we go out to farms with those results?
I suppose in small plot trials there are challenges at times around representativeness. So I suppose there's certain things that can be more difficult for us to replicate at a small plot level compared to in farmers' fields, as you say, with a lot of different factors coming into play or systems approaches, as you say. So these might relate to, machinery traffic, soil variability, environmental variability, field history, long-term rotation effects, drainage status, weed pressures and challenges, and pest pressures. So look, we really need to carefully consider all these factors as researchers when we're carrying out trials in Oak Park, just to make sure that they are reasonably well representative of what's out there on farms.
I suppose there's often a case where farmers would be saying, "Oh yeah, it's grand for you down in Oak Park. You've got nice weather and it's lovely soil and all that kind of stuff. But geez, try and come farm with me. It's I'm heavy soil and I'm this and I'm that." And I suppose maybe it would it be in those kind of circumstances where there's a bit of validation. So in other words, in Oak Park, we come up with a result. And the farmer might then try and validate that result on farm themselves to see whether it works, if you like, in those kind of circumstances in their heavier soil or their slightly rainier environment.
There's definitely value to be found in carrying out some of this work on farms. And look, we do carry out some of this work on farms across the country. But I suppose, as you say, there's particular value to be found in terms of validating some of the practices we've tested here in Oak Park and can see value in, especially on different soils and even in different, I suppose, climatic or weather conditions. So yeah, I suppose that would be a real area of value in terms of on-farm trialing.
John, I want to bring you in here just around the question of you've been advising farmers for a long time out there. You've seen a good few farmers having a go at doing bits and pieces of on-trial farms. What sort of questions do you think are best suited, or types of trials that farmers are doing on the ground that are kind of best suited to those on-farm type trials?
Well, firstly, Michael, it comes down to the individual farmer and where their interest lies. So usually you'll pick out a trial that a farmer has an area that he has a specific interest in. And I suppose the next question you have to ask the farmer is, like, where do you plan on doing this, or where is the potential trial site? You need to look at the trial site then and just analyze the suitability for the same trial. And I suppose the last thing you need to look at with the individual farmer is, do they actually have the time to commit to the trial? And also, do they have the required tools or equipment to complete the trial as well?
So, John, just with that, have you an example of one or two farms that you've seen who were trialing, or you might give an example of the type of trial that they were trying to do, and it came out with they had the capacity, as you say yourself there, and then they kind of came out with a result out the far side.
But in the ideal world, Michael, you'd have a farmer with a yield monitor and a combine. So, give one example where a client actually tried liquid fertilizer versus granular fertilizer on malt barley. So individual tramlines would have been treated with liquid versus granular. And then what the farmer would have done, he would have actually used the yield monitor and the combine to calculate the area cut in each plot, and also the weight of grain that came off it. And you had a yield in thereafter. So you had an individual yield for each treated tramline or controlled tramline.
Okay, very good. Jack, just going back to you, we talked a little bit there about the, just testing one variable at the time. But in terms of the output from an on-farm trial, is it all about just tracking the yield, or are there other things that the farmer should potentially be tracking along the way to give an indication that the differences are actually real there?
As we all know, yield is very important, and I'm sure a lot of farmers will be directly focusing on that. But as you said, there are other metrics or factors we could look at. So I suppose it very much depends on what the farmer is looking at. But speaking generally from a research perspective, the more information we have at the end of the season, the better. So as additional information, as far as that goes, it can help us interpret results. So things like plant counts, maybe head counts, some grain quality information that you can get from your merchant. So this can all be very useful in trying to interpret your results at the end of the season, and it can just give you an indication of what was happening during the season, and it can really give some insight into your results.
John, just in terms of a farmer setting up a trial on their farm, how would they essentially go about it?
Suppose, Michael, the first thing is the site itself. Like so, just you have to have a suitable site. The site, the field size obviously needs to be able to accommodate the trial size of the trial itself. The field as well, you're looking for an even or consistent soil type. You're not looking for changes in topography in the field. So where you've got humps and hollows in fields, that wouldn't be a desirable trial site either. And I suppose the next thing, Michael, thereafter then is just explain to the farmer, make sure there's a clear understanding of what's required, what tramlines should be treated with what, and so on.
So, in terms then of measuring yield, say, and we did talk about that before, and I know you talked about the tramline trial and having a yield monitor on it. If a farmer doesn't have a yield monitor, is there any other way that a farmer can have a go at trying to measure the yield on say the various different tramlines that you talked about?
What an individual could do, Michael, is you could actually what's the grain that's harvested within a given tramline could be emptied into a trailer, and that individual tramline could be weighed. Again, in measuring yield in that fashion, realistically, you need to be close enough to a merchant's yard, because that will take time in itself. But I suppose back to a comment that Jack had passed as well, like you can actually measure the influence of a given treatment as well just by the physical characteristics. You could look at like plant number, tiller number, grains per ear, so on as well. So there's a number of different ways of looking at how a given treatment could influence yield.
Okay. I was talking to a guy a few years ago now, but he was actually using a diet feeder at the time to measure parts of the trial that he had on his farm. I thought it was a very good idea, and then just back into the yard where he was gathering the grain anyway and just emptying it out and kind of going again. It seemed to be a relatively straightforward and simple way of doing it if that was available to them. In terms of the area, John, how large an area would you be recommending that people would try and measure the differences on?
Well, obviously, Michael, the larger the better. But generally, I would say, like most people will be operating on a 24-meter tramline. So you'd be looking at a treated area. I'd say definitely want 100 meters in length. Again, if you're to look at if the individual treatment, the tramline is going. If you're going to look at a long area, you need to be conscious that the trial site itself or area is going to be quite sizable, and you'll need a large field to accommodate that as well. So look at generally, Michael, if you're working on a 24-meter tramline, I would say that the treatment would want to be at least 100 meters in length.
So you're talking about, say, in a tramline scenario, 100 meters by 24 meters is in the full width of that particular tramline.
Yeah, so like you're talking 2,400 meters, so it's probably something in around 0.6 of an acre. For a given treatment, and again that would be replicated 4 times, and then you could have a control as well. That you'd have 4 controls as well.
I'm just thinking about that as you're talking there, and Jack, just if that was fertilizers and somebody wanted to do maybe something different on the fertilizer scenario, obviously the spread pattern of the fertilizer spinner goes over the 24 meters. It kind of there's a bit of an overlap and that kind of stuff. How would a farmer consider or get around that?
When testing fertilizer rates and products that are spread with a broadcast spreader, really. So it's critical to consider the spread pattern, Michael. So if a farmer was carrying out sort of a standard tramline trial, they'd usually apply a treatment to single tramlines if they were putting on a treatment with a sprayer. But as you say, the nature of broadcast spreaders, you really have to take spreader patterns into account. So you'd actually need 3 tramlines, one after another, to be spread with the same treatment in order for the center tramline to actually get the correct application rate with the nature of the spread patterns from broadcast spreaders. So this really needs to be considered when you're planning your trial, as the number of tramlines needed in a trial for testing fertilizer rates or products can add up very quickly and amount to a sizable area. So yeah, definitely needs to be considered.
And John, just with that in mind, because not every farmer is going to have, I don't know, maybe 20 tram lines across the field, that works into be a very big field. Would it be of benefit that multiple farmers in a similar area would be trying something different? So they might reduce down the size of replications on their own farm, but if you like, it's replications across the farms. Would that help at all?
It would, Michael. It's like, I suppose, back to Jack's point, where you need multiple tram lines just to achieve one tramline treatment. You're going to be limited in terms of how many treatments you can complete within a given field. Obviously, you want a very sizable field if you want to complete them all on one given farm. And again, I suppose if you're dealing with smaller fields, as you just mentioned, they can be replicated on other farms. And that gets rid of the potential for variability then within a given treatment. So yeah, that's all achievable, Michael. Yeah.
Okay. And John, when I suppose that trial might get to the on-farm trial or validation, we might call it, maybe might be a better way of putting it, gets to yield, or even through the year as the farmer is looking at the differences that they can see by eye. What if the farmer doesn't see any great differences by eye? Does that mean they didn't do a great job on it, or is it the fact that there just are no differences?
It could be either or, Michael. But generally, because you don't find a difference, you shouldn't be disappointed. Maybe the fact that you don't have a difference, that is the actual result. So you could be comparing 2 products, and in reality, there is no difference between 2 products. So the actual result is correct. But again, I suppose, like, you could have a result where there's no difference. But again, if you look back to trial work that's done, replicated trial work that's done in Oak Park, and in Oak Park, it was found that, yeah, there was a difference, and elsewhere, let it be in UCD or go further afield, go to the UK, they found that there was a positive or negative result between 2 treatments. If you're not finding the same thing, you have to start asking the questions why. And maybe there was some error during the season when the trial was actually being completed. So I said, again, Michael, yeah, you could have, there's always the potential for error. It's about sitting back and actually looking where the potential error could have actually occurred.
And you talked there, John, around the, having looked to see where the replicated trials are done, as in probably independent replicated trials is probably best for any commercial product. But where a farmer can't find any of those, and the trial or demonstration that they're doing on their own farm doesn't seem to show up anything, what sort of conclusion should they draw on that?
Again, Michael, you could have products sold to you as a farmer. And the first question I always ask is, like, where is the independent research work to support your claim? And usually when you don't find independent work to support a given product, well, there's usually a reason for it. There's a strong possibility the product doesn't actually do what it's meant to do. And at the same time, if you actually complete a trial on farm to analyze, see, does the product make a difference? And if it doesn't on farm, that shouldn't be a surprise to a farmer, because, like, ultimately, sometimes there isn't independent research work to support the product in the background for a given reason, because there isn't a difference there to start with.
Yeah, that makes sense. Jack, we might just finish off talking about, maybe to a degree, the Rolls-Royce piece of trying to do on-farm trials, and you might explain what the ADAS tramline trial technique is about.
That technique, Michael, really, it just it takes into account a robust methodology on how to do tramline trials. So it really incorporates the factors we were talking about earlier. So you've you've your replication, your randomization, and your blocking. So it incorporates all those different factors along with I suppose field selection being a strong one of them. Before you even have the trial in the field, making sure you're in the right field, and maybe staying away from parts of the field where there's been previous variability in crop performance before there was any trial there before. So really there's some nuance there in field selection and data analysis that can all be I suppose carefully looked at after harvest when you've your yield data in from your GPS combine yield monitor. And while it sounds sort of daunting, it is very doable, and we wouldn't expect a farmer to be able to tackle that on their own. So I always say two heads are better than one. So farmers who are interested in doing something like that should really, I suppose, contact their Teagasc tillage advisor, who of course will be supported by research colleagues here in Oak Park. So yeah, I think that's probably the best way to go, because one person trying to do it on their own, it might not be the easiest way to go.
That's a really good piece of advice. So if somebody is really interested in having a really good go at it, talk to John down in the southeast or his colleagues across the country, and we'll get them set up in terms of trying to get a good tramline trial set up on their farm. Listen, guys, that was great to go through all of those various different bits and pieces. I think there's plenty of scope, and I know there's certainly lots of farmers out there who are doing some of their own on-farm trials. Maybe there's with a little bit more thinking, they might be able to get a little bit more out of them. So Jack, again, thanks very much, and John, thanks again for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks, Michael.
So that's it for this episode, and my thanks to Jack and John for joining me on the podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague, and as always, rate, review and follow on Apple or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy, thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.